You can only have one child, and if you dare to have more, I will kill your babies, burn down your houses, or leave you no option rather than giving away your child to orphanages like this and this and this. Welcome to China's One Child Policy. Este matecito nos lo clavamos en inglés porque la invitada que tenemos hoy habla inglés, entonces por respeto a ella lo hago en ese idioma. Prepárense porque lo que van a ver y lo que van a escuchar es que te deja sin palabras. So, we're in 1979. China had just billions and billions of people, and the Communist Party said, okay, let's implement this regulation. You can only have one child. The government said the population was growing like really fast, and there would be like resource scarcity, and there wouldn't be like adequate resources for everyone. So they said, we don't have to have more people in this country. Some people may say, okay, but people were gonna die anyway because of a famine, for example, because of food shortage. But the thing is, let's see how they did this. So as soon as the policy was implemented, China was plagued with this propaganda, like in matches, playing cards, streets, books. Everywhere there was this like thing that said having one child is better than anything in the world. Until now, nothing seems as atrocious, but let's see what happened in case you didn't obey this policy. Women that did not comply with the policy and have more than one children were abducted from their houses by the government officials, and they were tied up and ripped off like pigs and taken to the hospital to have forced abortions and forced sterilizations. They didn't care if you were like 8 or 9 months pregnant. They would kill your baby when the baby would go out of your womb. These are the things that happen in China. This one is crazy as well. For example, if you worked in a fabric, they would retain the payment of all the people that work in the fabric until you would force your abortion. In case you wanted, you could prevent these atrocities by paying a fine that was around like 7 or 8 times the family's annual income. So it was impossible for millions and millions of Chinese people. In China, women were like useless. Everybody wanted to have a boy. No one wanted to have a girl. Actually, like the scans were prohibited because if everybody had a girl, they would abort it. And if they had a boy, they would keep it. So what happened? People started to abort girls, or when they had this girl, they would abandon them in the middle of nowhere. Like you could see in the market, these girls in the baskets, like sunburning, because they were left over there like for 1, 2, 3 days until someone like got them, or they died because of sunburning. If you were lucky enough to survive, maybe a human trafficker would get you and would give you away to an orphanage because they would give them like $40. Let's see how the orphanages were at that time. I just used the word abandoned, but I believe that's not the correct verb because people were coerced to do this. And as well, there were many cases of kids getting ripped away of their homes by the government and taken to orphanages. So human traffickers and human trafficking was a huge business. Orphanages would give away like some small portion of money, and then they would give the children into international adoption, like for $15,000, $25,000. So the guest that we have today is a woman from China who was adopted, and we will go through her story and how she experiences her present with everything she had to go through. And she will give us more details about this one-child policy. I would like to close up my introduction with these images that this photographer that was making this project, like in the trash, he found all this aborted fetus, like these babies in in this garbage. It's devastating, but I believe it sums up like what the one-child policy was.
I was found by a fire station, I believe in a box. When they got to the orphanage and they were signing all the papers and such, they asked them if they wanted to switch my birthday.
Do you know who your birth parents are?
But then, so when the mother fell pregnant again, so she actually went and stayed in their village's cave for about 9 months and gave birth there. My older sister, when she was brought home, she had a big mark on her leg, so it was like she had the rope around her leg. Or if a child seemed like they were sick or ill, they would place them in these death rooms, which is essentially them saying, this child's probably not gonna make it, so we don't care for it. Okay, you're gonna ignore it, I'm gonna make you feel it. And then boom, I passed out.
Hi Chantal, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Wonderful. Now that I'm talking to you, I'm better than ever. Would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Chantal. I was adopted at 14 months. My parents took a plane out to China, and I am from the province Anhui. The city is called Liu'an. The background information my parents got was that I was found by a fire station, I believe in a box. Later on in life, I kind of realized that's probably not the case because there's been a lot of, stories that were made up of what had happened. And I've been raised here in Canada, in Toronto, Ontario, for my entire life. And I have a beautiful family, a wonderful family, great parents. And I've got an older sister who's also actually adopted from China too. So I gotta say, I've been pretty lucky in terms of I know what other people have gone through versus where I'm at today. And I've been very fortunate in my life, for sure.
Let's talk about what happened in China in 1980,
Absolutely.
so that people can understand why were you adopted, and
Yeah.
why do you think those were circumstances where you were adopted as well?
The whole purpose of the one-child policy started in China because they were already starting to get overpopulated. And so the government had decided, let's set in a one-child policy so that families can only have one kid. But unfortunately, with that, once that rule came into place, there wasn't much birth control. There wasn't much health care for women in general, just the people in general. So if they got pregnant, they didn't necessarily have a choice on whether they wanted to keep the kid or not. Sometimes a lot of women had to hide because they knew that the government would take the kids from them. There were very big fines that were set. So if families did have more than one child, if they could pay it off, then they could keep the kid. But if not, then the child would be removed and then adopted out to someone else and saying, oh, they were abandoned, they were left behind, they didn't have a family. And that's how they also got even more money, in my opinion, because they were taking from their own people and then taking from others who thought they were helping all these kids that needed help, but that wasn't always necessarily the case.
I read and I saw in the documentaries that maybe the human traffickers that would get the kids that were like left on the streets, they would get like $40 to $100, and maybe the adoption would cost like $20,000.
That's actually something that I asked my parents after we watched the One Child Nation, One Child Policy. I turned to my parents and I asked them, how much was I? And they had said it was about 15,000. And that's 15,000 Canadian. But still, if you think about the amount that the birth parents the birth parents were giving to the government for having the children in the first place, and then they're now charging the adoptive families that think that they're helping these kids. Well, we're making quite a bit of money there for that. And it didn't really feel like a lot of people there had a choice as to whether they were going to give their child up for adoption or the unthinkable could happen, so they would just hide them. So there's a lot of ghost children too. So a lot of people
Yes.
that were born with their parents in China, but because they knew the laws, they knew the one-child policy was in place, they had to hide their entire life. So they couldn't go to school, couldn't go out in public, or could only go during certain hours because they knew that there wouldn't be people around. And I feel like a lot of people didn't know about the ghost children for a long, long time because they were hiding. They weren't supposed to be found. So that was a big part of it too. Feel like that was a larger impact to China than it was when they were pushing the kids out, basically.
And these kids are still like ghost persons because
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of people that cannot have ID and they
Mm-hmm.
cannot have like basic human rights, like getting married or going to school or
Mm-hmm.
going to university, because they still are not recognized.
Yeah, I feel like because the government had pulled this, the one-child policy, and then once they decided, oh, was it in 2012, I think, that they finally changed it to a two-child policy?
2015, I think so. 13 or
Yeah,
15.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I knew it was around there, but I
Yes.
remember some people told me like, "Oh, but it's a two-child policy." And when I first heard that, I was like, "What are you talking about? It's been one-child policy for so long." But yes, once they switched it to the two-child policy, um, I feel like some people assumed that, oh, the ghost children can show themselves now. It's like, no, because
No.
they would still get fined if they found out that you've been lying this entire time. So there was no really safe way out of it. It was
No.
either get the child somewhere safe or raise them in the darkness at your own, in your own place, your own home. And it sounds terrible to me, you know?
Of course. And I read like so many books about it. And the things I read, I believe that like there's no movie that can be like even to what to the things I read, like
Yeah.
ripping away the kids of the ones of the mom, even though
Hmm.
you were like 8 months pregnant.
9 months too.
Um,
Yeah. They were ruthless.
or they would take the kid away and they would kill it over there,
Yeah.
like put
They
it
would
into the
either have.
water.
Yeah, there's I don't know if you remember through the One Child Nation there is the clip where they're looking through the village and you can see trash bags and there was an infant that was disposed, and it was because they didn't care what happened afterwards. It was, oh, you broke the law, here's the policy. And that was what I really appreciate about that documentary was it showed a perspective from the people who lived through it truly. And I remember when I first watched through it, in my own stomach, it felt like, oh, this explains everything of what I was feeling. Always I couldn't always explain it. I didn't always have the words for it, but it made a lot of sense of why I felt the way that I felt growing up.
It's interesting what you said, because let's tell the people that what you
Mm.
mentioned about the kids inside the garbage, it was because
Oh
there
yeah.
was this guy, this photographer that was making this like a project
Mm-hmm.
about like this place is full of trash, full of garbage, and all of a sudden he saw this bag, like the hospital bag, that it's yellow because of the medical
Mm-hmm.
disposals. I don't know if that's the word.
Yeah.
And he saw like this baby, this perfect baby, like with hands and everything. And as soon as he started walking, he started seeing more and more babies. And it says medical disposes, like it was nothing, like it was.
Yeah.
Um, and that guy that lives in China had his studio closed. That the government
Mm-hmm.
went over there and tried to shut him down,
Oh
kind of,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, that's incredible. When you see that on the documentary, it's like devastating.
I warn
Chantal,
people for that just
mm,
because of that scene. I always tell them, it's a beautifully done documentary, but it's got
yes,
some very deep, dark
explicit.
matter that you need to be prepared for on the inside, I feel like, because if you're not thinking about that and then you go into it, I feel like that's a big shock for a lot of people.
Yes, it can be.
Mm-hmm.
Chantal, do you know who your birth parents are?
No, I do not. I was given no information. I don't actually technically know my real birthday, actually.
Mm-hmm.
My parents were told July 13th.
Okay.
And when they actually adopted me, when they got to the orphanage and they were signing all the papers and such, they asked them if they wanted to switch my birthday. So it was just like, oh, we gave her this day, but do you want to change it? And it felt like, let's make this perfect little bundle. Oh, you don't like that day, here you go. And that was always such a weird thing that my parents told me, but I was also glad that they told me that because they thought that was odd too. But they just figured like, oh, maybe, some people want to change the birthday or there's a number that's more significant to them. But I was still like, that's just such a weird thing to ask. Like, do you want to change another portion of their history that you already don't technically know? So
And do you want to know who your birth parents are?
I feel like I went back and forth with that growing up. When I was really young, I always thought yes. I always really wanted to get that information. But as I got older, and once I healed a lot of those things, like through therapy and such, my answer is now I'm happy where my life is. But if the opportunity arises, I would take it. But I'm not actively seeking that in my life. I
Okay.
don't think that that will make me feel complete to get those answers, sort of thing, if that makes sense. I did struggle with that a lot when I was younger, though.
Because nowadays, people might know or might not, but there are like these platforms where you can like upload your DNA and
Yeah,
see if you
I've
have
done that.
matches. Ah, you
Hmm.
have done that?
I did it with Ancestry.
Okay.
I had gotten it as a gift years ago at Christmas, and
Wow.
um, it didn't really come up with too much. I think it showed me a fourth or fifth cousin, so very distant cousins, and it was a potential. It wasn't, a full
Okay.
match.
Okay.
Um, there was a young woman that I had met through Ancestry. I had reached out to her on Instagram or something, and I said, we're not directly related or anything, but it showed that we're fifth, sixth cousins, whatever it was, away. And so we started chatting and communicating. She actually had the opportunity to meet her birth family, and she was
Wow.
sharing that with me when she was going through all of that. Um, it was it was an incredible experience to watch her go through it, and I was really glad that she shared that with me. It also made me realize that's what I feel like a lot of adoptees, once they hear about it, they kind of, oh, that sounds nice. Like maybe I want to get those answers, but sometimes some people aren't ready for those answers too, So it
Of
just,
course.
yeah. But that was always beautiful to me hearing about that one.
Because I heard that nowadays, correct me if I'm wrong, but the
Mm-hmm.
government is like making this platform where all the not all the DNAs, but it's like for free that you can upload your DNA. Am I right?
I think so. I've definitely heard of that. I haven't done it.
Okay.
Because I feel like they were trying, now that they have a lack of women there, they, especially with the one-child policy in China, they
Yes.
need more women now. So I feel like that was their way of
Okay.
trying to open doors again to have people wanting to come back or feel safe to come back, because when the one-child policy, even the two-child policy, was still very strong, if you went back to China and you did find your roots, for example, some people didn't want anything to do with it because they didn't want to get caught by the government
Oh,
and pay these big fines. It would be like, no, get out, go away, like I don't know you, because they could still get in trouble. So it was, I don't know, it felt kind of like a trick, almost like a trick question, like, oh, you can do it, but you could also get in trouble. It's like, yeah.
wow. Because the
Hmm.
fines could be like 10 times your annual year income. So it's almost
Yeah.
impossible to pay it, right?
Well, especially in the economy there, they made the fine so ridiculous that
Mm.
nobody could really afford it except for the wealthy. And the wealthy, like, even they couldn't always afford it or it wasn't worth it. So they would just be, okay, well, let's just, dispose of them. Let's just do something else with it. Yeah.
And can you explain the people why were women like so many girls like were abandoned instead of boys.
Mm. It's in China traditionally, the men were seen as the offspring that would be taking care of the elder once they get to that stage of retirement and such. It was always perceived that the man is the one that works, the man is the one that brings back and provides for the family. And they are also the ones that carry the lineage. So they're the ones that are going to produce more for their offspring and their family line. So women in China, like once they marry off to a family, so wait, if the woman gets married to the family, she becomes part of that family. She's no longer theirs, if that makes sense. She belongs to that family. So I feel like a lot of people wanted their lineage to continue, so they decided, oh, it'd be better to have a boy than a girl. And some people just already had kids or had a child and they couldn't take on because of the policy. And so it just became very confusing in my opinion. But yes, women were given up a lot more frequently than men because of that tradition, I find.
On the documentary, it's like very clear. You know, this scene where all the grandpas are talking, and they tell her her granddaughter like, You're useless." You know, it's like,
Yeah.
do you remember?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they say like, there's a woman that says like, the girls would eat afterwards, men would eat.
Yeah.
Like if
Yeah.
there was something that was left, the leftovers were for the
That's what
girls.
they would have. Yeah.
Wow,
Men were seen as like the top of the mountain and everyone else was just looked down upon.
it's
Yeah.
incredible. um which are like the most, like, the things that hurt you the most that you heard that women had to go through the one child policy?
I feel like hearing how little women had a choice in things is devastating for so many reasons on its own. But for me, it was also um, a little bit of closure, knowing how much women had no choice because it wasn't like it was an easy decision to just oh, done and done, which growing up, that's what it kind of felt like because they painted the picture of, oh, it's just because you weren't a boy. They probably just that was the easy answer of like, oh, it's probably just that. But there was so much more to it, and knowing how so many women were getting this forced abortions, they were getting the forced hysterectomies so that they could no longer bear children, and they were taken in the middle of the night, like all of these things, it just, it in a way, like for some people, I'm sure it would add to their adoption trauma, but for me, it healed a portion of it as well because it felt like, that explains a better, not a better reason, but a bigger and more in-depth reason as to why I was left behind, and I felt more at peace with that answer.
I believe, like I said in the video introduction,
Mm.
that the verb is not abandonment, it's
Mm-hmm.
coercion. Because to
Yeah.
abandon, it involves like something voluntary, and when you're
Mm-hmm.
coerced, there's no voluntary, it's a word.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
voluntary. There's no it's not
um
yeah,
and
voluntary.
that's so important. That makes all the difference, like
Yes.
maybe your birth mother had no choice, and that's incredible
Yeah.
because women were really like taken away from their homes were being burned, maybe
Mm-hmm.
like the salary of all the co-workers that worked with your mother were not being paid. So it
Mm-hmm.
was a lot going on. It was not abandonment, it was like coercion.
Yeah, I remember the young woman that I met through Ancestry.
Mm.
She's wonderful, and it's been great to get to know her. And every now and then we'll send each other messages like, "Hey, how's life going?" kind of thing. But her story and hearing what her birth mother had gone through, I felt like that also just gave a whole other perspective of the other stories that you haven't heard about, you know, through the documentaries and through the articles and such. Her mother, because she knew she had fell pregnant, but the first time that she was pregnant prior to her, she had a son, I believe. And when she went to the government or to the hospitals, because, you know, she said, oh, yes, this is my son, da da da. Most times, I think people were told if it was a boy that they would have a better chance of keeping them. And she was, I think, 8 or 9 months pregnant, and they just took it from her and just, I don't know what ended up happening to him. But then, so when the mother fell pregnant again a few years later or a few months later, I'm not sure, she knew, "Oh, I'm not going through that again." So she actually went and stayed in their village's cave for about 9 months and gave birth there, and then came back kind of to society. But then they knew that uh, I think they knew about it, so they had to discreetly, you know, pass her along to someone else or something else. And I don't exactly know what happened after that. I think she was given to a family friend or who they thought was a family friend, and then he just ended up selling her to the government or something. So yeah, there's so many stories like that, and that also piqued my curiosity as I got older of I wonder what my story was, because before I was just like, oh, it's simple, a simple answer of like, oh, I was a girl, but there could be so much more to it. So
So much
yeah,
more.
it's always an open-ended question to me where when people are like, do you want to know? I'm like, well, of course I kind of want to know. It's kind of cool,
Yeah,
but there's also so much more to it where I'm always like, do I really want to know? So yeah,
because
depends.
it's a lot of information.
Yes, exactly. I also realize it's
Um,
getting dark now.
and when did you realize you were adopted?
Oh, it's frozen.
Oh,
Oh, sorry. I realized I was adopted at a very young age. I think from the moment I could really start communicating at about 3 years old.
mm,
My parents were always very open with my sister and I, telling us the story of we went to China, we came and got you guys, we adopted you, brought you home. So I always knew from a really young age that I was adopted. My mom really wanted us to know that growing up, so there was no confusion, but it was still, the we adopted you, but that doesn't mean we love you any less. But I've always known since I was very little.
and when did you learn what the one child policy really was?
Um, I want to say I was in elementary school, and I remember someone told me about it or was trying to tease me about it, being like, "Oh, well, your parents didn't even want you," kind of thing. And I had to go look into that because I was just like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I didn't get the depth that I know today, obviously, but it was enough to realize, oh, there's a lot more to this story than I realized. And I feel like even my parents didn't know the extent of things until we all watched
Mm.
that documentary together.
Wow.
And yeah, like my parents knew as time went on, of course, but I don't think we realized the extent of things because as we were watching through the documentary, they were listing off all the cities that were highly trafficked back
Oof.
then. And my city was one of the top three that was listed. And my parents and I remember we sat there and we're looking at it. And then I look at my parents and my dad goes, obviously, if we knew that at the time, we wouldn't have done it. And I said, well, not. He's like, we didn't know. I was like, yeah, I
Wow.
hope you didn't know. But yeah, it's like that's also why I'm really glad that more and more people are talking about it because I feel like, well, me personally, anyways, I feel like I can express it more freely rather than people just trying to dumb it down or mute it and say, oh, but, you have such a better life here. Oh, but your parents are great. And it's like, yeah, I know, thank you, but that doesn't change the impact of
Of
what has
course.
happened.
Of
Yeah.
course. And the conditions of the orphanages, if, oh no.
So my parents weren't allowed to the orphanage I was at. public was not allowed to enter the building. I feel like they played it as, oh, it's for the health of the children, which in retrospect, that sounds right. You know, oh, they're so young, they could have something, you could be bringing something. But honestly, I think it was because they didn't want the public to see the truth of how overcrowded things were, how malnourished so many of the kids were. Like my parents said when they first got me, um, they met the orphanage, so the nannies brought the babies and they met them at a hotel or at the there was somewhere that they were meeting, but they weren't allowed to come on to the property. They weren't allowed to come in the building. There was a big fence that was around, and they were allowed to go there and visit the area, but they could not go in. And so looking back at it now, like even when we look at the photos, I look at the building and I'm just like, that looks like a puppy mill for children. That's so weird. It's yeah, no, they like a lot of people don't know about the death rooms in
I
the
know. Can
orphanages.
you tell?
Yeah. Death rooms were essentially if a child seemed weaker or if a child seemed like they were sick or ill, they would place them in these death rooms, which is essentially them saying, this child's probably not going to make it, so we don't care for it, or we're just not going to continue to care for them. And the death rooms were always something that stood out to me when I was younger and as I got older, and it was because, and through therapy, I feel like one of my earliest memories when I was an infant was actually in the orphanages. And I remember it was only about 2 or 3 seconds, and it's very blurry, very fuzzy, because I was only about 3 years old at the time, 2 or 3. And my eyes open, I look to the side, I see bars and empty cribs. So from what I've seen from the documentaries today, I felt like, and I don't know this for sure, but I felt like it was possible I was in a death room, because there was just empty cribs next to me. And I was the only one that I could see. They were whitish bars, but again, it was so pixelated because I'm very young at that time. And I always thought that maybe I saw that from a movie. I always thought that maybe I made it up. But it was just such a clear image that I remembered growing up. So I looked for it in movies. I looked for it, being like, where do I remember seeing that? And then I realized that probably was just my first earliest memory.
Wow. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
documentary called The Dying Rooms.
Yeah, I don't think I've watched through that one, but I've definitely heard of that one.
Yes. And definitely there were no like empty cribs on the other side of the orphanages. They were like overpopulated, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And in this image, I don't know if it's in The Dying Rooms in this documentary, but there's this image of the kids being tied up. Like, did you
Yeah,
see it?
yeah. Actually,
There,
it's ironic that you mentioned that. My sister, my older sister, when she was brought home, she had a big mark on her leg. So it was like she had the rope around her leg. And you know, you're a toddler, you don't understand what you're doing. So our assumption is that she was probably crawling or moving around. So that's why they have the string around their arm or leg so that they can't crawl away. So one of the earliest memories that my grandfather has of my sister and I, he always would talk about, oh, remember when she had that string on her, that mark on her leg? You know, we put cream on it when she first came home. That was always something that my grandfather on my mom's side. So they're my mom's Chinese, my dad is French Canadian.
Mhm.
My mom's first generation Chinese. Canadian in her family. So her father lived in China. He came out to Canada, um, goodness, years and years ago. But that was always something that stood out to him was my sister and her leg. And he still talks about it to this day. If we go and visit them, he'll mention that. He'll ask me or Chloe about it. You know, do you remember when she was really little and this happened? And so he also apparently will mention it to my mom over the phone when they talk. It'll be like, oh, remember when she was little? So that was definitely something that stood out to everyone, especially for him. And he has dementia. So it's it's incredible what has stayed in our minds, kind of thing.
If you get to see this documentary and you see the images, it's really heartbreaking. It's like kids all day long, like sitting down, tied up, like
Oh, I have seen that. Yeah. And they're just banging and moving around because they want to do something. They're trying to get
yes.
stimulated.
And
Yeah.
there is like this disabled kid, and he's like always like kicking his head, tied up.
Mm-hmm.
It's inhuman. And
Mm-hmm.
and I'm happy that maybe some people will get to see this and know like what happened and what happens, because it's very like contemporaneous, this thing. You
Mm-hmm.
are suffering the consequences as many other women, many other. I read in a book that they're called like black children. You said ghost children, but I heard black
Yeah,
black
same
children
thing. I think
is
so. Yeah.
so many black children or ghost children that do not know, no, cannot live lives like you or me, because they're like
Mm-hmm.
ghosts. They cannot have any legal rights.
And it was interesting when ghost children started becoming more relevant, was because it went from, oh, but you have such a good family, which I already knew growing up. That was more emotional guilt that I just didn't need. But they would say, oh, but you could have been a ghost children, you could have, and I'm like, yes, I am very aware of all the
Wow.
possibilities that could have happened to me, which is why I carry so much emotional guilt from it. And it was, I feel like a lot of those things that people say too are things to make themselves feel better, because they don't want to either face the reality of what's happened, or they just don't want you to like pity yourself over what's actually happened. And it's like, but it did. Yeah.
It was like one of the most atrocious thing I saw, like in the whole history, I believe.
Yeah. I I never really think about it that way until as we chat about it. I always remember when we'd hear about wars, when we'd hear about the negative things that can happen in the world, uh, when I knew what I knew about the one-child policy, it was it was one of those things where I always remember, but they're doing that over there, but that's what's going on over there. But so many people didn't know about it.
Yes.
Um, and so
And still
that always
don't.
confused me. Yes, and it confused me growing up because I was like, but didn't you know about this? And they go, no, what do you mean, yeah, there's a lot of people that still don't know.
And would you like to go to the place where your birth occurred? Or you
I
both?
had the opportunity years ago. I was performing with my music school, and we were actually performing in China. It was a
Wow.
big group of cellos and violin groups. We all traveled out, and we were just performing at different spots. We were in the city that I was found in, and my mom, we were really trying to go out there just because my mom thought it was important that I go reconnect there. But unfortunately, with the schedule that we had for performing,
Mm,
it didn't work out. And I thought that I would be very upset about that at the time. But even just being in China felt like a connection. It felt like the connection I needed. So it didn't feel like I had to go there to feel more
okay.
grounded, if that makes sense. I already felt at peace once we were just in that area, and I was very happy to get out of there once we got there. I was like, okay, I've been here, let's get out of here.
Okay, okay. It's
Yeah, I'm like, that's
and
cool, let's go.
maybe it's a silly question, this one, but because your
Never.
birth mother is Chinese and your adoption mother is Chinese as well, but do you feel
Mhm.
Chinese, for example, or do you feel like more Canadian or?
I was very fortunate that my adoptive mom is Chinese,
Mm,
especially because she was able to continue traditions that I know a lot of my other adoptee friends did not get. They didn't
that's
get to
nice.
experience the culture that we have. And I think that that was something that was always very special and unique that my sister and I got to share was we looked like we could have been a part of our family, but we just knew we weren't. So I even remember when I was younger, growing up in elementary school, I'd tell people, it was my fun fact, I'm adopted, and people didn't believe me. They thought I was
Mm.
lying. And I was like, that's just racist. What do you mean? So I definitely feel
Yeah.
like I was fortunate and I still have the culture in me. But I know a few friends who were adopted into, you know, American families or just different cultures, and they definitely feel like they've missed something of
Mhm.
themselves for different reasons. So that part couldn't relate with because I was so fortunate that my mom, they like to celebrate Chinese New Year. We've been to traditional
Um,
Chinese weddings, and we like my mom's whole family, they had a restaurant growing up. And so it just felt like
China here,
I
China
got
there.
I was like I had the exposure, which I appreciate more as an adult than I did when I was younger and growing up.
I don't know if you want to answer this question, but is your
No, go
sister
for it.
wanting to know like their birth parents as well, her birth parents?
Mm, I've asked her that. I don't think that that's something that she's actively seeking in her life.
Okay.
Um, I feel like she's one of those kind of people that the less she knows, the better.
Mhm.
Whereas I am a person that feels better the more I know. So
Mm.
we're very opposites in that way, where I always felt like I need these answers, and she would be like, "Why? Why do you want them?" So we were very different in that aspect.
And how do you cope with the fact that you don't know like your origin, like your birth date of like those small but huge
Yeah,
things. Like how do you cope with it?
I feel like that was a bigger struggle when I was younger. But as I got older, I realized it just doesn't define me. It doesn't matter. But growing up, that was a very hard thing because,
Mm.
you'd hear people tell their stories of, oh, I was born at this time at this hospital, and blah blah blah. And I was like, I was found in the box in the middle of nowhere. I don't know any of this information. Like I just felt like there was missing pieces to the book for something. So it felt like I was, oh, I need to find these pages. But as I got older, I was like, it really doesn't matter to me. It'd be wonderful if that opportunity comes, but I'm not actively seeking or itching to find out. Like it's not like, oh, I have to know to feel better. But in terms of how I coped with it, I honestly feel like um I have a great support system. I have wonderful friends who know the impact it's had on me, and they know I've been able to express it a lot better. Whereas when I was younger, I couldn't verbalize it. I couldn't put the words to it. Whereas now I feel like I can express myself a lot more freely and a lot more confidently. I feel uh, I just have a very good support group. I would say that's something that definitely helped. And also knowing that your past doesn't define who you are today.
Is there any like message you would like to give to people or anything like you would like to say that maybe I didn't ask or I don't know?
I That's a good question. I feel like the usual the usual message that a lot of people say, but I feel like we don't always hear it when we say it, which is don't judge a book by its cover. You don't know what someone has been through in their life. Just because they appear like they have it all doesn't mean that they do. Treat people with kindness, the way that you want to be treated, and be a good person. I feel like that sounds so silly and simple of be a good person, but so many people today don't have that respect for one another, and we just kind of try to get to the top or try to, you know I don't know. I just be kind to one another and truly mean it, and treat people with respect, and just let people be themselves.
Wow,
That'd
that's huge.
probably be it.
Do you feel misunderstood nowadays?
I felt misunderstood when I was younger and growing up because I had such big feelings and I didn't know why I had these big feelings.
Mhm.
Like my parents told me all the time growing up, you just have really big feelings and that's okay. And I was like, I don't like having these big feelings. What do you mean about that? Um, yeah, when my dad, I think I've mentioned this to you, when my dad
Yes.
first got me, when they first adopted me, so this was the first interaction we had, he always told me, you had your eyes wide open, and it just felt like you had seen so much of the world already. And when he told me that as I got older, that's the way that I felt, but I just couldn't verbalize it, I couldn't express it. Um, yeah, I feel like I do that a lot better today, though, for sure.
That's
Hi.
wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Chantal.
No problem. This was wonderful, and I'm really glad that other people are interested in trying to get that message out there because that was why I started posting the videos that I did for fun. I was just like, I could do this. This seems like creative fun times. So
It
I
means a lot,
appreciate that you're doing this.
of course,
Yeah,
and it
thank
means a
you so
lot
much.
for other Chinese women and men as well that
Hmm.
suffered all the things they had to suffer and
Hmm.
that suffer nowadays as well. So
Yes. I
your
feel
voice,
like,
you
yeah, no, go
say,
ahead. Sorry.
no, your voice is so important. It really is
Thank you.
because I've been like searching people talking about one child policy, and I only found like four girls. Like you,
Hmm.
Taylor Shannett. Maybe you know Taylor Shannett because of
I'm
TikTok.
very bad at names, but if I saw a face, I'd probably know who they are.
Yes, you
Yeah.
would. Um, there were like only four girls talking about it, and I was like,
I
let's
felt
talk
like a
about
lot of
it.
people too, yeah, a lot of people downplay a lot of it too, or they try to say, oh, but my life is better here. That's a big one that I notice a lot of is because they have such a good life here, it feels like we cannot talk about it because, oh, that's the past. Why are we looking back? And it's like, but we never had the chance to open the book, read it through. You're just trying to say, no, no, forget it. You saw the biography. It's fine, you don't need the rest. And it's like, but some people like to have a bigger picture. Some people like to read the inside of the book, not just the back. Um,
Right.
yeah, that's the best way I can describe it, I think.
And getting to know your identity, it's like the most important thing we have in some
Mm-hmm.
way. Like it's fair for you
Mm-hmm.
to want to know your identity. It's fair. Not because you have a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful life, it's like shut up.
Yeah. But that's how it felt growing up, It's like,
No,
oh,
no,
but
no.
yeah, because that
Wow,
was the
poor
big
you.
thing. It was like I said, my parents are wonderful. Were they perfect? No, but they were amazing and they were very supportive, especially through this whole process when I was going through the emotional guilt and an emotional healing aspect.
Wow.
I think it was about 5 years ago, I started having these really bad dizzy spills. So it felt like the best way I could describe it was it felt like, when you have a couple drinks and you just feel a little tipsy, but
Wow. Mhm.
it felt like that, but it just never went away. And so doctors for maybe 3, 4 years, we were going getting tests done, blood work, MRI,
Wow.
CT scans, and everything. And honestly, I feel like a huge portion of where that was coming from was the emotional stress that I was enduring from the adoption and just life in general. Because they
Of
kept
course.
asking me, are you stressed? Are you stressed? And I was like, I don't feel stressed. But my body was stressed inside and out. And because I was ignoring the feelings inside, it decided, okay, you're gonna ignore it. I'm gonna make you feel it. And then boom, I passed out.
Of
So it's just
course.
like,
Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
The stress on the body is such a big influence on us. And I know we have more awareness of that today of how much stress can impact us, but stress, emotional stress or stress in general, like it impacts us fully. And I wish more people knew how much stress and emotions can impact ourselves or how we function because I always think of it as if you were trying to deactivate a bomb, right? And you're gonna be there's gonna be anxiety, there's gonna be stress.
Of course.
But if you knew that even if you deactivate this bomb, you're gonna be fine. Even if you mess up, you'll be fine. You'd be a lot less stressed. But going through it and just like I gotta cut the right wires, I gotta do this, it just feels like there's a lot of pressure to be okay, be happy, be better because you're in a better situation, and that just is
Yeah,
not the case for a lot of people.
of course. And it's not fair as well. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's fair for you to feel sad. It's fair to you to feel whatever you want to feel because all of the
Mm-hmm.
things you've been through. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this Holocaust survivor called Edith.
Mm-hmm.
I will send you the book because it's really good. He says, expression or depression. It's like if you don't express
Mm.
yourself, there's no way
Yeah,
out, you know?
I like that actually. And that was actually something my therapist had taught me through all of my sessions with her, was how much stress, how much things impact our body. And it was actually teaching me like this is how you're feeling. You need to relax the shoulders. You need to feel this through. And I was like, that sounds horrible.
Yeah.
No,
I
I'm
don't
not
want to
doing that.
feel. I
I
don't
don't
want to
want to feel
feel.
that. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Oh
Thank you
man.
so much, Chantal.
No problem. If there's any other questions or another time that you want to chat, just let me know because it's been wonderful chatting with you. Seriously.
Thank you. Thank you very much.